So here's the thing. I'm 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have peace. I'm writing this from my little stone cottage in the Cotswolds, place I chose specifically because it is the furthest thing I could imagine from the life I left behind in Dayton, Ohio. The walls of this house are thick, built centuries ago to keep out the damp and the cold. But I've found they work just as well at keeping out the chaos. And for a woman who has had a lifetime of chaos, these quiet stone walls are the greatest luxury I have ever known. My mornings are a sacred ritual. The sun comes up late and gentle in this part of England, filtering through the wavy ancient glass of my bedroom window and painting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. I don't use an alarm. I wake up when the birds decide it's time, their chorus, a much sweeter sound than the shrill ringing that used to drag me from my sleep for 40+ years of work. I make my way downstairs, my hand gliding along the cool, smooth wood of the banister, and the first thing I do is put the kettle on. The whistle of it boiling is the loudest sound in my house all day, and I like it that way. With a cup of strong Earl Grey in my hands, the steam warming my face, I step out into my garden. This garden is my masterpiece. It's not large, not by any American standard. It's a small enclosed patch of earth behind the cottage, bordered by a low stone wall covered in a riot of ivy. It's mine. Every single flower, from the defiant purple heads of the alliums to the delicate blushing faces of the climbing roses, was planted by my own hand. I spend hours out here, my knees aching in the damp soil, my fingernails permanently underlined with dirt. I talk to my plants, I wage a gentle war against the slugs. And I watch the fat, fuzzy bumblebees drift lazily from blossom to blossom. This small patch of green, this little English Eden, is where I finally learned to breathe. To take a full, deep breath that doesn't catch in your throat with the anticipation of what might go wrong next. For most of my life, something was always about to go wrong. And that something, more often than not, had a name. First it was Dad, then it was my brother. Ricky Dutt. My father was a man who could charm a bird from a tree and then curse it for singing out of tune. He was a whirlwind of booming, laughter and shattered plates, of big empty promises and the sour, sharp scent of whiskey that clung to the upholstery. He wasn't just a drinker. He was a professional, a connoisseur of self-destruction, and he made our home his stage. My mother, a woman who seemed to be perpetually fading into the floral wallpaper, simply tried to manage the debris. And I, his oldest child, became the family's little meteorologist, constantly scanning the horizon for the next storm. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight slur in his speech, the way his eyes would glaze over just before the thunder broke. Learned to make myself small, quiet, and useful. I learned to clean up the messes. Ricky, who is 9 years my junior, learned a different lesson. He learned how to ride the whirlwind. He was the charming, golden-haired boy who could always make Dad laugh, the one who could get away with anything. When Dad was in one of his rages, Ricky knew how to vanish. When Dad was in one of his maudlin, generous moods, Ricky knew how to be right there, hand outstretched. He learned that rules were flexible, that consequences were for other people, and that there was always someone else to clean up the mess. Usually me. Even after Dad drank himself into an early grave, the pattern was set. Ricky's life became a series of spectacular failures, each one cushioned by me. There was the can't-miss real estate scheme that ended in bankruptcy, the string of failed businesses, the women who would call me in the middle of the night, crying, asking how I could be related to such a man. Each time he would appear on my doorstep, a sad clown smile on his handsome face, a story of unbelievable bad luck on his lips. Just until I get back on my feet, Clara, he'd say, and I, bound by a sense of duty I could never shake, would let him in. My late husband, Robert, a man of infinite patience, would just sigh and shake his head. "You're too good to him, Clara," he'd tell me gently. "He needs to learn to fall." But I was terrified of letting him fall. I saw Dad in him. I saw the same charm. The same bottomless well of excuses and the same terrifying thirst. I thought if I could just keep him afloat, I could prevent him from drowning in the same sea that took our father. So I didn't. I kept rescuing him, writing checks, making calls, cleaning up his messes. It was exhausting. A slow, steady erosion of my own life, my own savings. It's my own peace. When Robert passed away 5 years ago, something in me finally shifted. Looking around the quiet house we had shared, a house that had so often been disrupted by my brother's chaos, I realized I was tired. Not just tired from grief, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had been decades in the making. Ricky, of course, came to the funeral, delivered a beautiful, tearful eulogy that was more about his own pain than Robert's life, and then casually asked for a loan to get his car fixed. That was the moment. The final crack in the dam. 2 years later, I sold the house, sold the car, put my furniture in storage, and bought a one-way ticket to London. I told no one in my family exactly where I was going, just that I was retiring abroad. I found this cottage online, and when I saw it in person, with the roses climbing the walls and the quiet winding lane out front, I wept. It was the first decision I had ever made that was purely, selfishly for me. And for 3 years, it has been perfect, utter, uninterrupted, glorious peace. That peace ended last Tuesday with the shrill, alien sound of my American cell phone. I keep it for emergencies, tucked away in a drawer, and the brash, synthesized ringtone is a jarring contrast to the gentle hum of my English life. For a moment, I just stared at the drawer, my heart starting a frantic, familiar rhythm against my ribs. That phone ringing could only mean one thing: family. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a name I had not seen in 3 years. Ricky. I let it ring, the sound echoing in my quiet kitchen. Ring after ring. Don't answer it, Clara. The voice in my head was firm, the one that sounded like Robert. You know what this is? Nothing has changed. But then another voice, the one that has been with me since childhood, whispered back. What if it's an emergency? What if he's hurt? Still your brother? I squeezed my eyes shut, my carefully constructed peace dissolving like a sugar cube in hot tea. On the 10th ring, I answered. Clara? Oh, thank God, Clara. You picked up. His voice was a frantic, breathless rush. It's the same voice he used when he was calling from the side of a highway with a broken down car or from a bar with a tab he couldn't pay. Ricky, I said, and my voice was steady, cooler than I felt. It's wrong. It was never a social call. It's never a just wanted to see how you're doing. Everything, Clara. Everything's wrong, he said, and I could hear the manufactured sob in his throat. He was a terrible actor, but he'd had a lifetime of practice. The crypto thing, it was supposed to be the big one. I put everything into it. Everything, and it's all gone. Wiped out. The guy who ran it, he just disappeared. Took everyone's money. I closed my eyes and leaned against the cool stone wall of my kitchen. Crypto, of course. It was always some newfangled get-rich-quick nonsense. It used to be Amway, then emu farming, then day trading. The product changed, but the story was always the same. I'm sorry to hear that, Ricky, I said, the words tasting like ash. Sorry, Clara, I'm ruined. He wailed. I lost the apartment. I've been sleeping in my car for a week, but they're going to repossess that tomorrow. I have nothing. Nothing. I'm calling you from a damn public library. Here it comes, I thought. The ask. The same ask I'd been hearing for 40 years. I don't know what to do, he sniffled. I've got no one else to turn to. The silence stretched between the Cotswolds and whatever library in Ohio he was huddled in. I could hear the faint sound of a librarian shushing someone in the background. I looked around my kitchen at the copper pots hanging from the rack, the vase of fresh-cut sweet peas on the table. The view of my perfect garden through the window. My sanctuary. My fortress against this very man. This very chaos. What do you want me to do, Ricky? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I can't send you money. I'm on a fixed income, a pension. You know that? Oh, no, I wouldn't. Ask Clara. Not after. Well, not ever again. He lied smoothly. It's not about money. I need a place to stay. For a little while, just a week or two, to get my head straight. To figure out my next move, I could fly standby. Wouldn't cost much, the air left my lungs in a rush. No, the word was a scream in my mind. Absolutely not. Not here. You can't let him in here. This was the one place he couldn't touch, the one part of my life he hadn't managed to ruin. Letting him in would be like willingly introducing a disease into a healthy body. It would be suicide, Ricky. I don't think that's a good idea. I started, but he cut me off. Please, Clara, he begged, and his voice dropped into a low, desperate register, the one he saved for the kill shot. I'm scared. For the first time in my life, I'm really, really scared. You turn me away, I'll be on the street. Swear. To God? Is that what you want for your own brother? To be some homeless guy sleeping under a bridge? The guilt was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing my heart. He was a master at this, at turning his failures into my moral obligations. He knew every one of my weaknesses because he had helped to create them. He was pressing on the old, deep bruise of my programming. Take care of him, clean up the mess. Don't let him fall. I was silent for a long, long time. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a small silver clock. Its ticking almost silent. It was the last gift Robert had given me. Its gentle, steady rhythm was the heartbeat of this house, the heartbeat of my peace. I held its cool weight in my palm and thought of my father's drunken rages. Of the smashed whiskey glasses I would sweep up in the morning, of the stench. Of stale beer that clung to the carpet of my childhood home. This house had no such ghosts. It smelled of lavender and lemon polish and baking bread. And I was considering inviting the vampire over the threshold. Clara, are you there? Key's voice was small, pathetic. I took a deep breath. A decision formed in my mind, cold, and hard and clear. It was a terrible, awful decision, and I knew I would regret it. But the thought of him, my father's son, sleeping under a bridge, I couldn't do it. Not yet. But this time it would be different. This time there would be a rule. Not a request, not a guideline, a law. An unbreakable, ironclad law with a sentence of immediate execution. Ricky, I said, my voice cutting through his impending sniffle. It was a voice he hadn't heard from me before. It was the voice of a woman with nothing left to lose, because she had already built a life from the ashes. I will buy you a ticket. You can stay for 2 weeks. 2, not a day more. You will spend every day looking for a job or a way back home. You will be clean, you will be quiet, and you will be respectful of my home. Oh, Clara, of course. Swear. You won't even know I'm here, he gushed, the relief in his voice palpable. I'm not finished, I said, and the coldness in my tone made him stop short. There is one rule, Ricky, not a suggestion. It is my one and only rule. You break it and you are out. It's that same day. I don't care if it's the middle of the night. In a blizzard. We will have no discussion and there will be no second chances. Do you understand me? Yes. Yes. Anything, Clara. I held the silver clock to my chest, its ticking a steady counterpoint to my racing heart. My house is a dry house, Ricky. There is to be no alcohol. You will not buy it, you will not bring it in, and you will not drink it, not even outside of this house. For the 2 weeks you are under my roof, you are to be completely and totally sober. That is the price of admission. For the first time, he was silent. I could practically hear the calculations turning in his head. He knew exactly why I was making this rule. He knew the ghost that stood between us. Ricky, I pressed, do we have an agreement? Yeah, he said finally, his voice a little too casual. Yeah, of course, Clara. No problem at all. Not a drop, you have my word. It was the same word he had given me 100 times before. A word as worthless as his crypto wallet. but it was the only thing I had. "I'll book the ticket for the end of the week," I said, my voice flat. "I'll email you the details." Hung up before he could thank me, before he could fill the space with any more of his empty promises. I placed the little clock back on the mantel, its ticking suddenly sounding fragile, vulnerable. I stood in the middle of my quiet kitchen, for a long time just listening to it. Tick, tock, tick, the steady, peaceful heartbeat of my life. A life that now had a countdown timer. He was coming. The whirlwind was coming. And I, the family's old tired meteorologist, had just opened the door and invited the storm inside. The drive to Heathrow was a 4-hour round, trip through a landscape that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. Green rolling hills dotted with fluffy white sheep stretched out under a placid gray sky. Quaint little villages with nonsensical names like Chipping Norton and Cotswold passed by my window in a blur of honey-colored stone and cheerful pub signs. It was the England of postcards, a world of serene, ordered beauty. And I was driving through it to import the one thing I had crossed an ocean to escape, my brother, with every mile that brought me closer to the airport. The old familiar tightness gathered in my chest. It was the feeling I used to get as a child, walking home from school, wondering which version of my father would be waiting behind the door. Would it be the laughing, charming man who'd slip me $1 for ice cream, or the sullen, brooding stranger with whiskey on his breath? That feeling of uncertainty, of bracing for an impact you can't predict, had been the background radiation of my life for so long. I had forgotten how exhausting it was. For 3 years, I had lived without it. Now it was returning, like a chronic illness I'd foolishly believed myself cured of. Heathrow was a shock to the system. A roaring, chaotic city-state of perpetual motion. The air buzzed with a dozen languages, the scent of jet fuel, and the palpable anxiety of thousands of people in transit. It was everything my quiet life was not. I found a spot in the arrivals hall, my back against a cool pillar, and watched the faces pour through the sliding glass doors. Faces of weary business travelers, of tearful families reuniting, of young backpackers starting an adventure. I searched for a face I both longed for and dreaded to see. And then, there, he was. Ricky. He looked older, of course. The 9 years between us seemed to have shrunk. He looked every bit of his 59 years, maybe more. His golden hair had faded to a sandy gray, and there were deep lines etched around his eyes, and mouth that weren't from smiling. He was thinner than I remembered, and he was carrying a single, battered duffel bag that looked half empty. For a fleeting, painful moment, my heart ached for him, for the bright, beautiful boy he had been, and for the broken man who stood before me now, looking lost under the harsh fluorescent lights. Then he saw me, and the old magic flickered on. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, instantly erasing 10 years of hardship. He straightened up, his shoulders went back, and suddenly he wasn't a lost soul anymore. He was Ricky. Charming, magnetic Ricky. "Clara," he boomed, his voice carrying over the din. He strode towards me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled faintly of airplane air and desperation. "You look incredible. Regular English rose." "Shh, you made it then," I said, patting his back awkwardly, already pulling away. "Never doubted it for a second," he said, holding me at arm's length. "Look at you. This country life agrees with you. You're peaceful." He said the word like it was a fascinating, exotic specimen he was examining under glass. "I am," I said, my tone more clipped than I intended. "Let's get your bag." "This is it," he said, hoisting the sad-looking duffel. "It's traveling light. A man on a mission to rebuild." The charm offensive continued for the entire drive back to the cottage. He was brilliant. I had to give him that. He didn't mention his problems, didn't talk about money, didn't complain. Instead, he asked about me. He asked about the village, about my neighbors, about my garden. He made me describe the difference between a scone and a biscuit. He marveled at the thatched roofs and the winding country lanes. He was performing the role of the perfect, grateful guest, and he was doing it so well that even I, his most skeptical and jaded audience, found myself starting to relax. The tightness in my chest eased, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe he had finally, truly hit rock bottom and was ready to change. When we pulled up to the cottage, he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned, Clara. You've got yourself a real-life hobbit house. This is amazing." He was, for the first few days, the brother I had always wished I'd had. He was immaculate. He made his bed in the small guest room every morning. He insisted on doing the washing up after meals, scrubbing my pots until they gleamed. He came out into the garden with me, listening with rapt attention as I explained the challenges of fighting black spot on my roses. He even managed to fix the squeaky hinge on my back door, a small annoyance I'd been meaning to get to for months. "See?" he said, proudly swinging the now-silent door back and forth. "I'm useful for something." He walked into the village with me, and I watched, with a strange mix of pride and apprehension, as he charmed Mrs. Gable at the post office and got a genuine booming laugh out of Mr. Henderson, the notoriously grumpy butcher. "Your brother is a delight, Clara," Mrs. Gable told me, her cheeks flushed. And in that moment, seeing him through their eyes, he was a delight. He was funny and engaging and handsome. I saw a glimpse of the man he could have been, the man I had spent a lifetime making excuses for. We fell into a routine. In the mornings, I would work in my garden while he sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, networking and exploring remote opportunities. In the afternoons, we'd take long walks through the public footpaths that crisscrossed the surrounding fields. In the evenings, I'd cook and we would eat together, okay? And he would tell me stories from the past few years. Heavily edited versions in which he was the perpetual good-hearted victim of circumstance. He never once mentioned alcohol. He drank the tea I made him in the morning and the water I served with dinner. He never complained. The first crack appeared on day 5. I came inside from the garden, ready for lunch, and found him still at the kitchen table, staring intently at the laptop screen. But as I got closer, I saw he wasn't on a job site or a networking forum. He was watching a video of a poker tournament. The sound was off, but the bright colors of the casino and the intense faces of the players filled the screen. "Productive morning?" I asked, my voice neutral. He jumped, startled, and quickly clicked the window closed. "Oh, yay, you know. Just taking a little mental break. It's a grind, this stuff. Sending out dozens of resumes, tailoring cover letters. You wouldn't believe the work involved." "I'm sure," I said, turning to fill the kettle. I didn't say anything else, but I had seen the look on his face as he watched those men gamble. It was a look of hunger. The same look our father used to get when he stared at a full bottle of Scotch Dot. From then on, I started to notice things. Small things. His job search seemed to involve an awful lot of naps. I'd find him asleep on the sofa, the laptop open on his chest to a page that had been static for hours. The helpfulness started to wane. Coffee mug would be left on the side table. Shoes would be kicked off in the middle of the living room, right in the path. They were tiny infractions, the kind of things that wouldn't bother most people. But to me, they were tremors before the earthquake. They were signs that the performance was ending and the real Ricky was beginning to surface. The passive-aggressive. Comments started on the first Sunday. Was paying my bills online, a quiet 10-minute task I did every week. "Must be nice," he said, looking over my shoulder from the sofa. "It's just click and pay. No sweating, no robbing Peter to pay Paul." I didn't look up from the screen. "I worked for 45 years, Ricky, and Robert and I were careful. We saved." "Oh, I know," he said quickly, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "You were always the responsible one," sang Clara. "I'm just saying, you've got." It made this little cottage, the garden, no worries in the world. It's a fairy tale. There was an edge to his voice, a bitterness that soured the air. He wasn't complimenting my life. He was belittling it. He was framing my careful, hard-won peace as a kind of lazy indulgence, a fairy tale that I didn't deserve any more than he did. He was diminishing my work to make himself feel better about his own lack of it. It was a classic Ricky maneuver. The old tension was back. My cottage no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, and I was on high alert, waiting for the actor to drop his mask. I started listening at the door of his room, trying to hear who he was talking to on the phone in hushed tones. I found myself watching his hands, his eyes, looking for the telltale signs of a lie. My home had become a prison, and I was once again the warden. The real alarm bell rang at the end of the first week. He announced he was going to walk to the next village over, a place called Upper Milford, about 5 miles away. Thought I'd check out their library, see if they have a better internet connection, he said breezily. And the walk will do me good, clear my head. It sounded plausible, too plausible. All right, I said. I'm making a shepherd's pie for dinner. Don't be too late. He was gone for almost 6 hours. When he came back, his cheeks were flushed and he was unnaturally cheerful. He bounded into the kitchen, smelling of the outdoors and something else, something sweet and minty. What a walk! This country is gorgeous, he proclaimed, rubbing his hands together. Is that dinner I smell? I'm starving. I looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were a little too bright, his movements a little too expansive. And that smell. It was wintergreen. Overpowering chemical wintergreen. It was the smell of the strong mints Dad used to chew on when he'd been drinking during the day, trying to hide it from my mother. It was the smell of deceit. My blood ran cold. Did you find the library? I asked, my voice tight. I did. It was great. Sent off a few more applications, he said, avoiding my gaze as he went to the sink to wash his hands. I said nothing. I served the shepherd's pie, and we ate in a silence that was thick with all the things I wasn't saying. He talked. Enough for both of us, rambling on about the beauty of the walk, about a funny-looking dog he saw, about anything and everything. I just watched him, every nerve in my body screaming that he was lying. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the cottage, the gentle creak of the floorboards, the hoot of an owl in the distance, the soft, regular sound of Ricky's snoring from the guest room. He sounded peaceful, innocent. Am I going crazy? I asked myself. Am I so used to the chaos that I'm inventing it now? Am I looking for a reason to kick him out? Because I regret letting him in. Robert's voice echoed in my memory. You're too good to him, Clara. The next morning. I waited until he went out for another of his head-clearing walks. The moment the door closed behind him, I went into his room, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt like a trespasser, a spy in my own home. His room was messy. Clothes were draped over the chair. A damp towel was on the floor. It was the room of a teenager, not a man of nearly 60. I started tidying up, my hands shaking, telling myself I was just cleaning. I picked up the jeans he'd worn the day before from the floor. And as I did, something fell out of the back pocket. It wasn't a flask. It was a small, folded piece of paper, receipt. My breath caught in my throat. I unfolded it. It was from a pub in Upper Milford. It's the King's Head. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon. This was only one item on the bill. 3 pints of lager. I sank down onto the edge of his unmade bed, the small piece of paper trembling in my hand. There it was. Not a smell, not a suspicion. Proof. Black and white, undeniable proof. He had sat in a pub and drunk beer while he was supposed to be in a library looking for a job. He had come back to my home, my dry home, with alcohol in his system and a lie on his minty breath. He had broken the one rule, the one single sacred law I had laid down. I stood up, the receipt clutched in my fist. The cold, hard calm washed over me, extinguishing the frantic anxiety. The doubt was gone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was right. I walked out of his room and stood at the window, watching the lane where he would soon reappear. The meteorologist had seen the storm clouds. She had read the signs. The whirlwind had not passed. It had just been gathering strength, and the first drops of rain had begun to fall. I did not confront him, not at first. The receipt from the King's Head sat folded into a tiny, sharp square in the pocket of my apron, a secret I carried with me for 2 days. It was a toxic little talisman, and I could feel its presence every moment he was in the room. I watched him, my politeness, a thin, brittle veneer over a core of cold fury. I watched him pretend to search for jobs on the laptop. I watched him sip the tea I made him, his face a mask of placid innocence. He was a magnificent liar. A lifetime of practice had made him an artist. Every interaction was a performance. I would ask, "How was your walk today, Ricky?" And my voice would be light, airy. He would answer, "Great, Clara, productive." Cleared my head, and his smile would be wide and guileless. We were like two spies in a foreign country, communicating in a code of pleasantries, each of us fully aware of the other's deception. He knew that I was watching him, and he seemed to be taking a perverse pleasure in the charade. He was daring me to call him out, to break the fragile peace myself. He knew my aversion to confrontation, and he was using it as a shield. My home, my beautiful sanctuary, had become a Cold War theater. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. I found myself cleaning obsessively, as if I could scrub the dishonesty from the very atmosphere. I polished the silver until my reflection stared back, warped and anxious. I weeded the garden with a ferocity that left my hands raw, pulling up nettles and dandelions as if they were the lies taking root in my house. Sleep offered little escape. I would dream of my father, of the smell of stale whiskey and the sound of his slurring angry voice echoing down the hallway of our old house in Dayton. I would wake up with my heart pounding, the ghost of that old fear clinging to me like a shroud. On Saturday morning, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. Saturday was market day, my favorite ritual of the week. The thought of leaving him alone in the cottage filled me with a dread so profound it was nauseating. It felt like leaving a fox in charge of the hen house. But the alternative, staying home, canceling my plans, letting his presence dictate my life, was unthinkable. That would be surrender. It would mean he had already won. "I'm heading to the market, Ricky," I announced, grabbing my wicker basket from its hook by the door. He looked up from the sofa where he was lounging with a newspaper. "Oh, great. Need me to come with? I can carry your bags." The perfect, helpful brother. "No, thank you," I said, my voice crisp. "I can manage. I'll be back around noon." "All right," he said, giving me a lazy smile. "Don't spend all your shillings in one place." I looked at him, standing in his socks on my clean rug, a man who had not earned a shilling in months, and felt a wave of contempt so strong it almost buckled my knees. I turned and left without another word, closing the door firmly behind me. The walk to the village square usually calmed me, but today every step was fraught with anxiety. Every familiar sight, the ancient yew tree in the churchyard, the row of identical slate roofs, the gentle stream that ran under the old stone bridge, seemed to be whispering a warning. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each one darker than the last. What was he doing in my house, alone? Was he on the phone spinning some new tale of woe to a friend? Was he snooping through my things? Or was he simply enjoying the silence, the temporary freedom from my watchful, judging eyes? The market was a balm, but not a cure. It was bustling with its usual gentle energy. I bought a crusty loaf of sourdough from a baker named Tom, a small pot of local honey, and a bunch of vibrant, rainbow-colored carrots, their feathery green tops still damp with morning dew. I exchanged pleasantries with people I knew, smiling and nodding, all the while feeling like an imposter. My mind wasn't on the fresh produce or the local gossip. It was back in my cottage, circling my brother like a nervous guard dog. I cut my trip short, buying only the essentials. The desire to get back home, a physical pull, an urgent, gnawing need. The walk back was faster, my basket heavy, but my feet light with apprehension. I turned onto my lane, and 100 yards away, I could see it. My cottage. It looked exactly as it always did, peaceful and solid, with a wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. "You're being paranoid, Clara," I told myself. "You're letting the past poison the present. It's probably just napping on the sofa." But then I got closer, and I heard it. Music. It was. Loud, thumping rock music, the kind he used to play in his bedroom as a teenager, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. It was a noise that had no place in the quiet symphony of my life. The front window was open a crack, and the sound spilled out into the lane. A flagrant violation of the unspoken code of village tranquility. My blood turned to ice. I walked faster, my heart now a frantic drum against my ribs. I reached my own front gate, and the smell hit me. It was faint on the breeze, but it was unmistakable. It's a sharp, sickeningly sweet stench of spilled liquor. Whiskey. My hand was trembling so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. But I didn't need it. The door was unlatched. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The music was deafening. A roar of electric guitars and pounding drums that assaulted my ears. The smell was a physical blow, a stench I knew from the deepest, most wounded parts of my memory. It was the smell of my father's rages, of ruined holidays, of fear. My wicker basket slipped from my grasp. The jar of honey shattered. On the stone floor, spreading in a slow golden pool. Carrots rolled under the furniture. Didn't notice. I could only stare at my living room. My tidy, peaceful, beautiful living room was a disaster. Cushions were thrown on the floor. The newspaper was scattered everywhere. And on my antique oak coffee table, the one Robert had spent a year restoring, was a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. A puddle of it was soaking into the polished wood, a dark, ugly stain. And next to it, on the floor, lay the source of the steady, gentle ticking that had been the heartbeat of my home. My silver clock, Robert's last gift to me. It lay on its side, the glass face shattered, the delicate silver hands bent and broken. It was silent. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." His voice slurred and ugly, cut through. The noise of the music. Ricky was slumped in my favorite armchair, a heavy glass tumbler in his hand. He was drunk, not tipsy, not cheerful. He was sloppy, belligerently drunk. His eyes were glassy and unfocused. His face was flushed, and a stupid, lopsided grin was plastered on his face. "Turn it off," I said. My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the music. "What's that, sis?" he shouted, cupping a hand to his ear. "Can't hear you over these killer tunes. Should listen to this stuff more often. Might liven the place up a bit. It's like a museum in here." I walked over to the stereo, my movements stiff and robotic. I felt strangely outside of myself, as if I were watching a movie. I pressed the power button, and the blessed silence that rushed in was so profound it felt like a physical presence. All that was left was the sound of his breathing and the frantic, silent scream inside my own head. I turned to face him. I didn't look at the whiskey bottle. I didn't look at the mess. I looked at the broken clock on the floor. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. He followed my gaze and waved his glass dismissively. "Oh, that old thing. Knocked it over. Whoops. Flimsy piece of junk anyway." Flimsy piece of junk. The words hung in the air between us. Didn't just break it. He didn't care. It was nothing to him. A memory, a legacy. A symbol of love and peace. It was just a flimsy piece of junk that had gotten in the way of his drinking. "I told you, Ricky," I said, my voice as cold and still as a frozen lake. "I had one rule." He snorted, a wet, ugly sound. "Oh, here we go. St. Clara and her precious rules." He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly, and took a step toward me. The fumes of whiskey washed over me, and I didn't flinch. "You know what your problem is? You live in the past. This whole place. This whole life. It's all about what's dead and gone. Dead husband, dead quiet, dead boring. He was using the words as weapons, and every one of them found its mark. He was desecrating my life, my choices, my grief. He was taking my hard-won peace and twisting it into a pathetic weakness. "You look down on me," he sneered, his face contorting into an ugly mask of resentment. "You always have. Little Miss Perfect, let me tell you something. I'm the one who's living. I take chances. I'm not hiding away in some hobbit house, talking to flowers and pretending the world doesn't exist." I saw him then. I saw him with a clarity that was terrifying. I wasn't looking at my brother anymore. I was looking at my father. The same self-pity. The same resentment of anyone who wasn't as weak as he was. The same need to smash anything beautiful because it reminded him of his own ugliness. The 40 years of excuses and second chances and carefully tended hopes I had nurtured. For him, they all burned away in that moment, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard truth. He would not change. He could not change. It was a black hole, and he would pull me down with him if I let him. "You broke my clock," I said, my voice still quiet. The calm was absolute now. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "It's a clock, Clara. I'll buy you a new one." "You can't," I said. My calm seemed to infuriate him more than any screaming match would have. He took another step, looming over me. "You know what? I'm glad I had a drink. Needed one. It's impossible to breathe in this house, with you hovering over me, watching my every move, just waiting for me to screw up. Well, here it is. Are you happy now? You finally get to be right." Yes, I thought, that's it. I finally get to be right. The realization was not triumphant. It was devastating. It was the death of the last, most stubborn shred of hope I had for him. I looked past him, through him, at the door. I saw my future, a future without him in it, a future that was quiet and orderly and safe, a future that started right now. I raised my eyes to meet his. "Get your things, Ricky," I said. He blinked, the drunken anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "What? Pack your bag," I said. My voice did not waver. It was as solid and immovable as the stone walls of my cottage. "I want you out of my house." He stared at me, his mouth hanging open slightly. Then he threw his head back and laughed. "Oh, you're kicking me out? Now, don't be so dramatic, Clara. I'll clean up. I'll be fine in the morning." "No," I said. "It won't. You have 1 hour to pack. I am going to call a taxi to take you to a hotel near the airport. And in the morning, you will be on the first flight back to the United States that I can book. We are done." The laughter died in his throat. He saw it in my eyes then. He saw that this wasn't a negotiation. The game was over. His safety net was gone. "You're serious?" he whispered, a flicker of fear finally breaking through the alcoholic haze. "I have never," I said, my gaze dropping to the shattered remains of the clock on the floor, "been more serious in my entire life." The hour I gave him was the longest of my life. The silence that followed my verdict was more profound and terrifying than the drunken chaos that had preceded it. Ricky seemed to collapse in on himself, the alcoholic bravado draining away to reveal the pathetic, frightened man underneath. He didn't argue anymore. He just stared at me, his mouth agape as if I had suddenly transformed into a monster before his very eyes. Perhaps I had. Perhaps a woman who finally chooses to save herself is a monster to those who have always fed on her sacrifice. He stumbled up the stairs to the guest room without another word. While he was gone, I moved with a strange, dreamlike efficiency. I found the dustpan and brush and carefully swept up the glittering shards of glass and the bent silver hands of Robert's clock. I didn't cry. My grief was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, too deep for tears. I placed the pieces into a small cardboard box as if I were handling the bones of a delicate murdered bird. I found a cloth and wiped up the spilled whiskey, the acrid smell stinging my nostrils. and then I scrubbed the spot on the coffee table where the bottle had left its dark, ugly ring. I was not just cleaning a room. I was erasing a presence, sanitizing a wound. I was reclaiming my territory. I called the only 24-hour taxi service in the area. My voice was calm and steady as I requested a car to take a passenger to the Travelodge near Heathrow. I gave them my address. I paid over the phone with my credit card. There was a finality to each action. A series of doors slamming shut behind me, making it impossible to turn back. When Ricky came back downstairs, he was carrying his sad, battered duffel bag. He was still drunk, but the belligerence was gone, replaced by a sullen, childish pout. He wouldn't look at me. He slumped onto the sofa. The one piece of furniture I hadn't had time to tidy on stared at the floor. We sat in absolute silence for 20 minutes. The only sound of the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. We were two strangers in a waiting room, waiting for a life to be officially pronounced dead. The headlights of the taxi sweeping across the living room wall was a blessed relief. I stood up. "It's here," I said. He didn't move. "Clara, please," he mumbled, his voice thick. "Don't do this. I'll fix it. I'll pay for the clock." "Get in the taxi, Ricky," I said. My voice was not my own. It was the voice of someone I was still getting to know. A woman made of iron and ice. He finally stood, his movements clumsy. He walked to the door and stopped, his hand on the knob, his back to me. "You're really going to just throw me out? In the middle of the night? In a foreign country?" Its voice was a pathetic whimper. "I am putting you in a taxi to a safe, clean hotel," I corrected him, my tone clinical. "I have booked and paid for your room for 2 nights. That should be enough time for me to get you a flight home. I am not throwing you on the street." Even now, in the midst of my righteous fury, the old programming was there. I was still taking care of him, still managing the logistics of his failure. He finally turned, and his eyes were filled with a venomous self-pitying rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you're so much better than the rest of us, hiding over here in your perfect little dollhouse. But you're just a cold, lonely old woman, and now you'll be all alone." He slammed the door behind him, stood there, my body rigid, and listened as the taxi's engine started up and faded into the night. Alone, the word echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my cottage. He meant it as a curse, but as the minutes stretched on and the only sound was the gentle creak of the old house settling, it began to sound like a blessing. I was alone. The whirlwind was gone. I walked over to the armchair where he had been sitting, the air still thick with his presence, and for the first time in 10 days I breathed. The attack began the next morning. Started, as it always did, with the cycle of remorse. My American cell phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, buzzed to life. Around 10 a.m., a text message from Ricky. "Clara, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. I am disgusted with myself. I was a complete jerk. Please forgive me." I read the words and felt nothing. They were just words on a screen, a familiar script from a play I had seen too many times. A few minutes later, another buzz. "I'm at the hotel. I've been up all night just thinking about how I behaved. It's not who I am. You know that. Please just call me." I did not call. I made myself a pot of tea and took it out into the garden. The morning was cool and bright, the air washed clean by an overnight rain. I sat on my little stone bench and watched a robin pull a worm from the soft earth. I focused on the simple, honest reality of my garden, a world away from the toxic drama he was trying to pull me back into. Buzz. The phone was on the counter inside, but I could hear its insistent vibration. "Clara, are you getting these? I'm worried about you. Please just let me know you're okay." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. He was worried about me. He, the agent of chaos, the one who had shattered my peace and broken a sacred object, was positioning himself as the concerned party, I stayed in the garden. When the apologies and feigned concern didn't work, the tone began to shift. An hour later, the texts turned petulant. Okay, I get it. You're giving me the silent treatment. Fine. I said I was sorry. Not sure. What else you want from me? This is about more than the clock, isn't it? You were just looking for a reason. You've been wanting to get rid of me since I got here. I went back inside and put the phone in a drawer. Out of sight, out of mind. But it was a futile gesture. A few hours later, the house phone rang. It's cheerful. British double ring, a sound I had always loved. I hesitated, then answered, Clara, honey. It's Carol. Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. A woman whose heart was as big as her blind spots were vast. She lived in Florida now. And her entire understanding of our family was built on a foundation of willful ignorance and sentimental greeting cards. Carol, I said, my voice wary. How are you? Well, I'm worried sick is how I am, she said, her voice a flutter of manufactured panic. I just got off the phone with Ricky. Oh, Clara, he sounds just terrible. Told me everything. It's all alone in some hotel and he's just beside himself with grief. Grief? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. About what he did, she exclaimed. He feels just awful about breaking your little clock. Honey, you know how he gets. He's a good boy. He makes mistakes. He's your brother, Clara, your own flesh and blood. You can't just abandon him in a foreign country. It's not Christian. I closed my eyes, my knuckles white on the receiver. The guilt trip had been outsourced. Ricky had called in. The reinforcements, Carol, I said, trying to keep my voice even. He was drunk. He broke a rule, a very important one, that we had agreed upon. Oh, I know, she said dismissively, as if sobriety were a quaint but ultimately trivial preference. But you have to have a little compassion. He's been through so much. To throw him out like that, it's just so cruel. That's not the Clara I know. And there it was, the ultimate weapon. Not the Clara I know. The Clara they knew was the one who absorbed the pain, who cleaned up the messes, who put everyone else's needs before her own. This new Clara, the one with boundaries and consequences, was a stranger, and who were trying to shame her back into a form they recognized. I have to go, Carol, I said abruptly. But Clara, wait. What are you going to do? You have to let him come back? Family is family. Goodbye, Carol, I said. And I gently hung up the phone. That was only the beginning. It was as if Ricky had activated a long-dormant telephone tree of family obligation. An email appeared from my cousin Mark in California, the subject line reading, "Concerned about Ricky." It was a long, rambling message about the importance of forgiveness, interspersed with passive-aggressive comments about how those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. My niece, Ricky's own daughter, who hadn't spoken to me in years, sent me a one-line text message. Don't be a bitch to my dad. The walls of my sanctuary were being breached. My quiet, peaceful cottage was filled with the angry, buzzing voices of people an ocean away. People who had no concept of my life, of my history, of the 40-year wound my brother had been picking at. They saw a single incident. Mean old Clara kicks out her poor, down-in-his-luck brother. They couldn't see the lifetime of betrayals that had led to this moment. They couldn't see it because they didn't want to. If they acknowledged the truth about Ricky, they would have to acknowledge their own role in enabling him. Their own relief that I was always the one to handle it. This was my all-is-lost moment. Besieged on all sides, I felt my resolve begin to crumble. The cold, hard clarity of the day before was dissolving into a fog of doubt and guilt. I walked through my house, and his parting words echoed. In every room, a cold, lonely old woman. Is that what I was becoming? Were they right? Was I being cruel? Unforgiving? Christian? I looked at the box containing the pieces of the clock, and for the first time I felt a pang of uncertainty. It was a broken clock, an object worth severing a family for. I sank into my armchair, the one he had sat in and felt the full weight of my 68 years. All my life, I had played a role: the responsible daughter, the dutiful sister, the family peacemaker. My identity was built on the foundation of their need. By refusing to play my part, I wasn't just casting Ricky out. I was setting myself adrift from the only family system I had ever known. The silence that I had craved now felt like a vast, terrifying emptiness. The loneliness he had cursed me with felt real. I sat there for what felt like hours, besieged by the ghosts of my past and the accusations of my present. My resolve was a tiny, flickering flame, and the winds of family obligation were howling, threatening to extinguish it completely. Almost picked up the phone, almost called him, to tell him to come back, to say we could try again. The words, "I'm sorry," were on the tip of my tongue. And then I thought of my father. I thought of him saying those exact same words, his voice thick with whiskey and remorse. The morning after he had smashed my mother's favorite china dish against the wall. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it. It'll be fine in the morning." It was the same script, the same cycle. An apology was not a change. It was just a pause before the next transgression. I looked at the stain on the coffee table. I had scrubbed it, but a faint dark ring remained, a permanent scar on the wood. Ricky's apologies wouldn't erase that. They wouldn't unbreak the clock. They wouldn't unsay the cruel, contemptuous words he had spat at me. They wouldn't give me back the 10 days of peace he had stolen from me, turning my sanctuary into a place of anxiety and suspicion. My family wasn't defending Ricky. They were defending the illusion that our family was functional. They were defending the comfortable, established order of things, where I was the designated shock absorber for my brother's chaos. My standing firm wasn't an act of cruelty, was an act of rebellion, was a declaration that the system was broken and I would no longer be its linchpin. The flickering flame of my resolve did not go out. Instead, it steadied, it grew. It burned away the fog of guilt and doubt, leaving a core of pure, unadulterated certainty. They could call me cold. They could call me cruel. They could call me a lonely old woman. I would rather be all of those things alone in my peace than be the woman I was, drowning in their chaos. I stood up, the exhaustion and doubt falling away from me like a heavy cloak. I walked over to the drawer and took out my American phone. I didn't read the new messages. I turned it off and put it away. I would deal with the family fallout later, or perhaps never. Then I sat down at my laptop, opened a web browser, and booked a one-way ticket from London Heathrow to Dayton, Ohio, for the following morning. I paid for it without hesitation. The finality of the act was liberating. A quiet, decisive click of a mouse that was louder than all of their shouting. I saved the confirmation as a PDF. Then I picked up my own phone, the one with the gentle British ring, and sent one last final message to my brother. It was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was not an invitation for more debate. It was a simple attachment of the flight confirmation. With a single line of text: "Your flight leaves at 11 a.m. tomorrow. A taxi will be at your hotel at 7 a.m. to take you to the airport. I have paid for it." I pressed send. And then I blocked his number. I did not sleep well that night. It was not the anxious, fretful sleep of the nights before, a sleep spent listening for creaks on the floorboards or the clink of a hidden bottle. This was a different state entirely. I was floating in a calm, gray sea of exhaustion, too weary to dream, too spent to fully rest. The battle was over, but my body and soul were still humming with the phantom vibrations of the fight. I woke before dawn, not to the sound of birds, but to a profound and absolute silence. It was the silence of a house holding its breath. It's the silence of a space that is finally, truly empty. My first act was to pick up my own phone, the one with the British number. My hand was steady. As I had expected, there was a string of replies from Ricky sent in the dead of night from his sterile hotel room. The final, desperate volleys in a war he had already lost. The first was pure disbelief. A flight. You booked me a flight? You can't be serious. The second was a pathetic attempt at a threat. You can't make me get on that plane. I'll just stay here. What are you going to do then? The third was a pivot back to wounded pleading. Clara, this is insane. We can talk about this. I'll go to meetings. I'll do anything. Don't do this to us. Don't throw away our family. The last one, sent around 3 in the morning, was a single venomous sentence, the dying hiss of a cornered snake. You'll die alone. I read the messages without emotion. They were no longer weapons that could hurt me. They were artifacts from a ruin, the last echoes from a man I no longer knew. He was right, of course. I probably would die alone. He had meant it as the ultimate curse, the most terrible fate he could conjure. But as I sat there in the quiet dawn of my own kitchen, the words had no power. I had spent a lifetime surrounded by the chaos of others, a life that was anything but lonely, and it had nearly killed me. A death in the quiet company of my own choosing suddenly seemed like a gentle, peaceful thing. I deleted the conversation at precisely 7 a.m. I imagined the taxi pulling up to the curb outside the Travelodge. I pictured Ricky, hungover and sullen, throwing his duffel bag into the back. I saw his face, a mask of resentment and disbelief as he was driven away, a passive passenger in a life that was no longer his to control. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt only a vast, quiet relief, the feeling of a great and terrible weight being lifted from my shoulders. A weight I hadn't even realized I had been carrying for 50 years. I made my tea, and for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, it tasted right. It was just tea. Not a tool for staying alert, not a comfort against anxiety. Just a simple, warm, fragrant cup of Earl Grey. I took it out into the garden as the sun began to rise, painting the undersides of the gray clouds in strokes of pink and softest orange. The air was cool and clean. The birds were beginning their morning chorus. My world, which had been knocked off its axis, was slowly, quietly righting itself at 11 a.m. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I typed in the flight number. A little icon of an airplane appeared on a map of the world. LHR 2-day, via ORD, on time. I watched as the little icon began to move, a tiny digital representation of my brother, being carried up into the sky and away from my life. I followed its slow, steady progress across the screen, across the south of England, out over the Atlantic Ocean. With every inch it moved, I felt lighter. With every update, I felt freer. Watching him leave not just my home, but my world. The distance was not just geographical, it was psychic. It was being returned to the place, the life, the problems that he had created. And I was being released from my lifelong, unasked for duty as his keeper. When the plane was a tiny speck over the vast blue of the ocean, I closed the laptop. The final severance was complete. Now the real work could begin. The work of reclamation. I went upstairs to the guest room, a space that had felt like a hostile occupation for the last 12 days. I threw open the window, letting the fresh, cool air rush in, chasing out the last lingering scent of his stale breath and minty deceit. I stripped the bed with methodical precision, bundling the sheets and the duvet cover into my arms. They felt contaminated. As I pulled the fitted sheet from the mattress, a small, worn paperback fell to the floor. It was a cheap thriller. The kind of book sold at airport newsstands had left it behind. For a moment, I was tempted to read the title, to look inside to see if he'd written his name. A final, foolish search for some piece of him to hold on to. I stopped myself. He was no longer my story to read. I picked up the book and, without a second thought, dropped it into the bin. I found one of his socks under the bed. I added it to the bin. I took the bundle of laundry downstairs and loaded it into the washing machine, adding an extra measure of detergent. I wanted to wash the very memory of his presence out of the fibers. The rest of the day was a quiet, deliberate ritual of purification. I vacuumed every room, the satisfying roar of the machine chasing the ghosts from every corner. I polished every surface, erasing the memory of his fingerprints. I took the box containing the shattered pieces of my clock and wrapped it in soft cloth, placing it on the highest shelf of my wardrobe. It was not something to be discarded. It was a relic now, a testament to a war one had survived. A reminder. That piece, once broken, must be fiercely defended. In the late afternoon, I went back out into my garden. I knelt in the soft earth, my hands connecting with the living soil. I dead-headed roses, their velvet petals soft against my skin. I pulled a few stray weeds that had sprouted in the last few days of neglect. Here, nothing was complicated. Things grew, they bloomed, they faded, they died. There was an order, a truth, to the cycle of the garden that was honest and real. My flowers did not lie to me. They did not make promises they couldn't keep. They simply were, and I, their caretaker, felt a sense of belonging here that I had never felt with my own family. As evening approached, I felt a strange sort of emptiness. It wasn't loneliness, it was just space. For so long, my emotional landscape had been crowded with his needs, his dramas, his chaos. Now there was just me. The silence in the cottage was no longer the tense, waiting silence of the past few days. It was a deep, resonant silence, full of possibility. It was the silence of a blank page. I made myself a simple dinner. Of soup and the fresh sourdough I had bought at the market, what felt like a lifetime ago. I ate at my kitchen table, looking out at my darkening garden. And then I did something I hadn't done since he arrived. I put on music. Not the jarring, angry noise he had filled my house with, but a gentle, melancholic piece by Chopin. The piano notes filled the quiet spaces, tender and thoughtful. And as the music swelled, I felt the cold, hard knot of grief in my stomach finally begin to soften. I cried. Not for Ricky, not for the brother I had just exiled from my life. I cried for the brother I never had. The one who could have been my friend, my confidant, my ally. I cried for the little boy with the golden hair who had learned all the wrong lessons about life. I cried for the decades I had wasted, the energy I had poured into a bottomless pit. The pieces of myself I had given away trying to save someone who did not want to be saved. And I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who thought that love meant endless, unconditional sacrifice. I mourned her, and I let her go. The tears were a cleansing rain. When they stopped, the heavy gray sea of exhaustion had receded, leaving behind a shore of pure, unadulterated peace. The peace was not a giddy, joyful thing. It was solid. It was calm. It was the quiet, unshakable strength of a mountain after a storm has passed. I had survived. I was battered and scarred, but I was still standing. I went into the living room and sat in my armchair. The stain on the coffee table was still there, a faint, ghostly ring. It would always be there. It was a part of the story of this house now, a part of my story. A reminder that sanctuaries are not given. They are built, and they must be guarded. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I needed to tell the story, not to my family who had already written their own version in which I was the villain. Not to my friends who would be forced to take sides. I needed to tell it to strangers. To a jury of anonymous souls on the internet who could look at the facts without the blinding, suffocating fog of family history. I didn't need their validation. Not really. I knew in my bones that I had done the right thing. But I needed to articulate it. I needed to take the chaotic, painful events of the last 2 weeks and shape them into a narrative. To put the words in order, to explain the history, the rule, the transgression, and the consequence. To write it all down was to give it a final, concrete form. It was an act of bearing witness to my own quiet, desperate, and ultimately victorious revolution. I retrieved my laptop, its surface cool under my fingertips. I opened a web browser and navigated to the forum. I clicked the button that read Submit a New Post. A blank white box appeared on the screen, a fresh page waiting. The cursor blinked, patient. I took a deep, clean breath, the first of its kind in a very long time. And I began to type. So here's the thing. I'm 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have peace.